Well, good morning to you. Here we are, pastor of Calvary Baptist, Hiwasse, Arkansas. Like Hawaii, doesn't it? Well, Johnny Palmer, appreciate you joining me here in Bible study. Have your Bibles. We're in John chapter 12. Lord willing, we're going to look at verses 20 through 24. The cross of Jesus Christ, the focus of the New Testament. You know, you'll find that Matthew mentions the crucifixion in 141 verses. Mark gave it 116 verses. Luke devoted 2 long chapters to Christ's arrest, crucifixion. But, think of this, half of the Gospel of John deals with events immediately preceding the crucifixion. That's amazing, isn't it? Well, in Acts, everything centers around the cross. It was Peter's message on the day of Pentecost. It was the apostles' theme at Antioch. Paul preached that, quote, he should be put to death, referring to the Messiah. He preached it at Thessalonica and Athens, etc. Paul's drumbeat was Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. R.G. Lee said this. He said, take the cross out of our preaching, whether that preaching be in a tent or a tabernacle or church in the country or big city, is like taking the heat out of fire, taking the melody out of music, the numbers out of mathematics, facts out of history, or words out of our vocabulary. And so we always have to remember that without Christ's substitutionary death, there is no forgiveness, there is no resurrection, there's no salvation, there's no hope, there's no nothing, okay? So we aptly call this section the Necessity of Calvary, the Necessity of Calvary. Well, first, you have the Greek's request. That's John chapter 12, 20 and 21. Notice the contrast. He starts out now. There's a clear contrast between the Jewish religious leaders, like in verse 19, and these Greeks that we see in verse 21. The normal question one would ask is, why did Israel reject her Messiah? You know, here these Greeks are coming to Christ, and yet those who should come to Christ, the nation of Israel, is rejecting him. Well, see, there's 2 distinct roles that the Messiah was predicted to fulfill when he came. All right? One was to bear the sins of men, people, humanity. The other, to bring the kingdom of God in, that long-awaited era of peace and prosperity. We call the millennial kingdom. Focusing on Israel, but that would have an impact, on the whole world. But these 2 concepts, they were to be accomplished by one person, but where people got confused is not at the same time. People, they saw this contrast, and some thought, well, maybe there's 2 messiahs. Most of them just scratched their head and said, I'm not sure how this is going to happen. But the fact of it is, first, the Messiah would have to come and deal with man's root problem, which is a sinful heart, and only then could he return the second time and set up his kingdom, okay? The people, they would reject the suffering Messiah because they wanted the reigning Messiah, and that's where the confusion came in. They didn't understand he had to suffer first before he could reign. And so when he came and talked about suffering, they thought, well, we don't want the Messiah of Psalm Isaiah 53. We want the reigning, conquering Messiah. And so it was confusing. So in these religious leaders' mind, part of the problem was also that they figured they were already saved, and they weren't. And you just read Romans 10, 1 through 10. They had a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. They thought that works, doing something, could bring about acceptance with God, but it can't. It can't. Man's too sinful for that. It takes faith totally trusting in what God, through Christ, does for you. So there's a real contrast going on here. And then notice the converts to Judaism. It says there were certain Greeks. Now, either this is a native of Greece, or like Timothy's father, just look at Acts 16:1, or referring to Gentiles as opposed to Jews. Sometimes Greeks is used in the Bible just for a general term that would be better translated Gentiles, like Romans 1:14 and 16. Well, these Greeks are obviously Gentiles, okay? Well, it says, among those who came up to worship at the feast. Well, this reveals that the fact that they're Gentiles and they're worshiping at the Jewish feast, they were proselytes, okay? In other words, they were Gentiles that had converted to Judaism. So many Gentiles converted to Judaism. Frankly, one, they liked the idea of monotheism, that is one God. You know, the pagan religion had many, many gods, which is polytheism, and which was confusing. And it was their pagan teaching was filled with contradictions, and so, you know, the gods would contradict themselves. Another thing is many Gentiles were attracted to the morality of Judaism. You know, pagan religions were filled with injustice, violence, immorality. Sound familiar? 10 Commandments were viewed as refreshing boundaries. It gave people some guidelines to go by. And listening to what's going on among much of what's happening today and among our political leaders, among a lot of these movements, it's amazing how unjust things are, how we accuse people of things just at the drop of a hat. You know, it's almost like people assume that you're guilty until proven innocent, which is impossible. If you're not in their camp, you can't reason with people anymore. Our society is, folks, it's in trouble, and we need to pray for it. And I'm telling you, the only hope for this nation is Jesus Christ, is the gospel. That's it. And we have no sense of right and wrong, no real decency, no settled authority, no justice. Everybody's living by their whipped up emotions or personal reasoning, or they make up the rules as they go on, and it just leaves us in a moral sewer. Well, the pagans were just like that in this day. So a lot of pagans, they went and were converted to Judaism simply because there was some sanity going on there. But a proselyte who didn't accept the Messiah would be as guilty as the religious leaders, okay? So apparently these Gentiles in our passage had a different mindset than the religious leaders. And although they were lost, they were obviously not afraid of the religious leaders, and because anybody who came to Jesus, they would be rejected by the religious leaders. Remember, we looked at that. You'd be kicked out of the synagogues and so forth. So these likely are converts to Judaism. Well, then you have contact with Philip. Now, the reason is, verse 21 says they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee. Well, Philip is a Greek name, and so they went to him because they had something in common with him. Their request, they asked him, saying, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Now, the verb wish is in an indicative mood, present tense, and it means it was a repeated request, and involved more than just seeing Jesus, but it was a petition that they might have an interview with him, you know. So both the religious leaders and these Greeks were lost. Both were religious, but neither righteous before God. And the difference being that at least these Greeks sensed their need, okay? And all religion does is cover up the rotten flesh of the self-life. Reminds me of a lad who had a friend, lady, and anyway, this lady was an elementary science school teacher, and she's at home grading papers, and the first question on the test was, name one of the major functions of the skin. And one child wrote this: to keep people who look at you from throwing up. I guess religion is like that. Anyway, you have the Greek's request. I thought that was funny. All right, furthermore, you have Philip's reluctance, and that's 21. And now his confusion, he doesn't know whether he should, bring a Gentile to Christ or not, and for good reason. Matthew, for example, chapter 10, verse 5 and 6 says this: these 12 Jesus sent out and commanded them, saying, do not, catch that, do not go into the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter a city of the Samaritans, but rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Jesus, the Messiah, was not sent to the Gentiles first and foremost. He was sent to Israel. Matthew 15:24, but he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So, since Messiah specifically came to Israel, and it was only after Israel rejected the Messiah that the focus turned to the Gentiles, well, he didn't know if he should bring these Gentiles to Christ, okay? So, it's a little confusion there. And then his companion, verse 22, Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn, Andrew and Philip told Jesus. Well, Philip and Andrew were always together. Everybody needs a friend like that they can go to and get help and advice and so forth. Stu Weber tells about being in the Army at Ranger School at Fort Benning, Georgia. And he said the sergeant yelled, we are here to save your lives. We're going to see to it that you overcome all of your natural fears. We're going to show you how much incredible stress the human mind and body can endure. The very first assignment was find yourself a ranger buddy. You'll stick together, you'll encourage each other, your life will be difficult, and you're going to need a friend. And that's true, isn't it? And you look at Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9 through 12, and it points this out. And God always gives us somebody that can help us out. Moses had Aaron, David and Jonathan, Paul and Barabbas, etc. Well, anyway, you got Philip's reluctance here, and then you've got Jesus, finally, his response. Now, this is a turning point. Verse 23, but Jesus answered them, saying, the hour has come. Now, up to this point, he's always been saying the hour is coming. And you might just look up John 2:4, John 7:6 through 8, John 7:38, John 8:20. But now he says it has come. And the idea is Israel has officially rejected him as Messiah. And this is seen in the Jews' reaction to him riding in. People call that the triumphal entry. It's really the tearful entry when he came riding in as a donkey and presenting himself as Israel's king or Israel's Messiah. But they clearly rejected him. Now, the Bible's use of the term hour might best be summarized by the colloquial phrase, time's up. You've heard that phrase, well, time's up. Well, as the bell sounds for the boxer at the end of a round, or a team at the end of their match, so it sounds for Jesus at the time of his crucifixion, okay? And it served as a reminder that God is not only involved in events, but orders their very timing, okay? And even those things that may appear arbitrary, in fact, they follow a schedule laid down by a God who is sovereignly working all things according to his timetable. And the use of the hour image is just most striking in John. And here, Jesus makes it plain from the very outset that his life and work is ordered by the Father's chronology, not his own or anybody else's. So once in Jerusalem, where his confrontation with religious leaders is inevitable, he declares that his hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And frankly, from this point onward, the chain of events unfolds, and it will end in his death.